Welcome, Angie. Thank you so much for being here and for being part of the United Against Silence Collective. And of course, we're looking forward to your workshop that's coming up.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Where in the world are we speaking to you from?
I am in Portland, Oregon.
Ah, beautiful. That's a pretty beautiful part of the country.
Yes.
In a lot of the time. I'm a fan of you personally and professionally, and we met at Goddard College when we were both studying there. And of course, I've seen your work on the page multiple times. You're published in a lot of places. And a couple of years ago, had the opportunity to see you perform in a couple of different ways. And of course, you do this really cool burlesque performance that I got to see when I was in Portland for AWP some years ago. And there was this one performance that was really interactive that you did at the Power of Words conference, which was at Goddard College in Vermont, where we first met. That was called Under Our Skin.
Yes.
And you combined images, like there was like a projected images and writing. So I think you were maybe performing some poetry with this like performance that ended in inviting the audience to write on you, on your skin, on your body. I'd never seen anything like that or experienced anything like that before. And I think it's such a great example of the risks you take creatively and how you merge these things together. And I'm just talking now. When am I getting to the question? But I was thinking a lot about like one of the things that you did that was part of that performance or experience was you showed selfies that you'd taken over a period of time. And how did the sort of conception of that, being an artist in all of these forms, visual, performance, literary, how do those things coalesce? Like, how does a performance like that happen?
Yeah. So I think for me, a lot of it is just like seeing the intersections in all of those forms of creativity, and that for me, some types of creativity will speak to one thing and another type will speak to another. Or, like, for example, at the start of this pandemic, I like suddenly just couldn't write anymore. Like I lost my I lost my words, and so I turned to visual art. And so I think for a performance like that, where it's really integrating all of those, it's just kind of looking at all the different ways that we can tell our stories and communicate our truths. And like for me, a big part of creativity in general, but especially performance art, is building community. And that those types of performances where it's interactive and it has a lot of different genres of creative practices in it, I feel like really reach out to different audiences than just one genre or another would.
Yeah. And as you're experiencing something like that, it feels almost like different parts of, as an audience member, different parts of my brain were activating. Like, right, like literary work sort of requires I imagine, and then there's this sort of like I'm trying to observe visually, and I'm also trying to now do and come up with a word to like put in. And I really, it's brave though, right? To like to expect an audience to keep up.
Yeah.
Like it's a bold ask.
You're putting a lot of trust in it, in the audience.
Yes. And in yourself to contain the audience or to like hold their attention, which is really like what's at a premium in the world right now. And I think there's so much also telling us, especially as like women who have maybe experienced, I actually don't know that there is anybody who walks through the world seen as a woman that doesn't experience some sense of like, am I safe? And like,
right, yeah,
like we're aware of violence, right? We're made aware of it when we're little, if we were girls when we were little, but certainly as you move through the world.
Mhm.
And to put yourself on stage
Mhm.
that way in either burlesque or performance where you're inviting people to write on you, um, how did you get there? Like, how did you work up the nerve? Like,
um I'm not totally certain. While I was at Goddard and doing my studies there, I was doing a lot of looks at performance arts and, just kind of the history of that, and other artists who have done these really interactive pieces. And yeah, the trust that is in that, because you don't know how the audience is going to react. And so there is an element of uncertainty. There's even just the element of uncertainty of like, am I going to go up here and nobody's going to come and interact with me? Like, am I just going to be standing here for 5 minutes? And so yeah, so I'm not totally sure how I just was like, okay, I'm gonna do this, but it just seemed kind of like a natural progression, I think. I was doing a lot of um, collaborative spoken word poetry type things where it was very audience generated and that sort of thing. And so this just kind of seemed like the next step to kind of integrate even more audience participation into work. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that thing, that middle school thing of like, what if and just nobody, like, what if this is embarrassing? Like, I'm
Uh-huh.
standing here and nobody's. How do you prepare yourself for that? Like, do you have like a thing like, okay, if nobody gets up?
Yeah, well, so part of it, I my my original like work before my current like life, my original work was teaching high school and middle schoolers, and so you got really good at just like waiting for somebody to answer a question and like holding that and like recognizing that probably it's going to get awkward for the students before it gets awkward for the teacher. And so it's the kind of the same idea.
Oh
Is
my
that
God.
like eventually somebody in the audience is going to be like, this is too uncomfortable, I've got to get up and do this. So it's just a matter, I think, of waiting that out. But also, if I have people I know in the audience, I will be like, hey, like if no one gets up, you got to get up and do this, because I think that not only is a matter of bravery for the performer who's doing that, but it's also an act of courage on the behalf of like all the audience members to get up and like go and do this. It's a vulnerable act for them too. So yeah.
Especially to, both times that I've seen you perform in two very different ways. You're a really skilled performer, and we're all wrapped, right? So we're like in it. And then it's like, and one thing about an immersive experience, and I don't mean immersive in the sense that it's used necessarily, but in the sense that you are immersed in an
Mhm.
experience, whether it's even like looking at a painting or reading a really good book, is that you forget yourself.
Mhm.
And then when you're asked to like participate, you're like, oh, should I have a self? And
Mhm.
like, what, like there's like a jarring moment um that happens that I think is like, then you get this version of a person,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Was
Yeah.
just because we're also hyper aware of ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, so you said earlier in the conversation that at the beginning of the pandemic, writing wasn't like
Mhm.
happening for you. You weren't
Yeah.
coming to writing. So you came to the page in a different way.
Mhm.
You were doing like visual journaling, right? I
Yeah.
remember seeing some really and also some exchange work where it was like you were sending people art. Is that
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Had you been creating art before that, visual art before that?
A bit. So I have for a number of years done this thing. It's called SwapBot. You can like find the website, and it's really cool because you sign up for these swaps where you create art and you're paired with somebody else and you exchange basically. And it's international, and it's cool because people from all over the world you're getting and receiving art from and sending it to them. So I've been doing that a bit, but those are like smaller pieces of work, and and not necessarily as I would say more kind of like under what you would consider like craft, as opposed to like art with a capital A, like
Right,
get all
right.
fluffy about it. But yeah, so then I started doing kind of the mixed media art journaling and stuff right around the time of kind of the pandemic starting. And it's interesting because I have always loved visual art, but I also have been very apprehensive of it. I took an art class in college that literally my mom made me promise her never to take another art class while living under her roof because it was so awful.
What was so awful about it? Were you messy?
Oh my goodness, yes. And there were so many nights of tears because I couldn't figure out the art projects, and it was just one of those situations where like I was trying to do art that just wasn't my thing, but for a class. And so I had this idea of like, oh, well, I am not an artist. That is not something I can do. And so it was kind of an exciting discovery to realize that, oh, I actually can do this. It's just playing with color. Like that's really all it is. It's just playing with color.
Um, and it's amazing how we fence ourselves off from certain things for periods of time. And I think it's almost like a little gift we give ourselves. Like it's, like it's shitty, but then also then you get to discover this thing. Like life doesn't get boring,
Yeah,
you just
absolutely.
keep pushing yourself. Um, I'm thinking also about how playing with color or doing something that's craft versus capital A art,
Mhm.
or writing in your journal versus writing a poem that you're hoping will get, or an article that you're hoping will get published. It's a different, the stakes feel lower, allow yourself to be messier.
Mhm.
And for me, I like, for writing, I really have to convince myself, remind myself, nobody's ever going to read, like, don't, if as
Mhm.
soon as the audience enters, I'm fucked. Like like it's, the whole thing becomes contrived. But as you do so much performance, how do you balance, like, because that is the intended final. For me, when I do a reading or when I meet somebody who's read something I've written, I'm like, honestly, I'm surprised, right? Because it's just like not a part of the thing that I'm doing.
Uh-huh.
Um, how do you how do you navigate that so that you can be free as you're creating? But I mean, there's no pretending like it's not for an
Right.
audience.
Yeah. I think really just adopting that idea of play has been really helpful for me. And so, I teach writing, and that's like the main thing that when I go into teaching is like, we are just here playing with words. Like, and so like the idea of like, okay, this is just like getting back to that child who just wants to like get their hands messy in the paint, or like sculpt something out of Play-Doh, or dance around like wild to music, like making all sorts of fun shapes with their bodies. Like if we can like kind of reach into that inner self and find that and just kind of hold on to that and think of this as, okay, this is play. But also like one of the things that I love about performance and writing and art and in all of its forms is that kind of community that it builds. And so like keeping that in mind, that like even if this thing is not perfect, and maybe even especially if this thing is not perfect, like other people are going to connect with it.
Mhm.
And like my goal through this is building community, not necessarily having this thing be amazing. And so just those kind of shifts in mindset, I think, have
Yeah.
helped.
Um, especially if this thing is not perfect, is like, yeah, actually. It's true of like all of the ways that we connect with people. We connect most with people who aren't pretending to be like a crisp cutout. Um, and thinking about getting into that play mind, are there any rituals or any things you do semi-reliably, like you can count on to
Mhm.
like help you activate your play mind?
I think approaching creativity with like through games. And so, for writing, just having like really fun prompts or, like unique ways to look at revising that are just really, um, yeah, just kind of fun and game and play oriented. Same with creative arts, just like getting out a bunch of paper and paint and being like, I'm just going to make marks on my paper today and see what I come up with. And letting go of kind of that idea of a final product,
Yeah.
I think is really the big one for for me.
And we're in such a final product oriented society,
Yes.
I think like probably more than ever in history because we're able to see everyone else's final product. Like we're almost assaulted by other people's final product the moment we wake up. Um, how do you sort of like manage that sort of like,
Mhm.
I guess, this podcast is called United Against Silence after our collective, thinking about, of course, the silences that are imposed upon us,
Mhm.
which it's, our duty, I think,
Yeah.
to, to crack open. Um, but there's also another kind of silence, a non-violent silence that's absolutely essential to allow us to be creative and to not hear like what we're supposed to be and right, like that other side of
Mhm.
it. How do you like, and you're a mom as well, you're
Mhm.
teaching, so you're like taking in other people's words all the time,
Yeah.
and responding to other people's work and like looking for what you're going to teach, right? Like we're constantly taking
Yeah.
in things.
Yeah.
How do you fence off silence for yourself? What does that look like? When does it happen?
Yeah. So interesting. Like, I always choose like a word of the year for myself. And so last year, and I choose a phrase as well. And so last year, my phrase was germinate and unfurl. And
Mhm.
it was just, I was thinking of this idea of the seed and how like it has to do so much work under the soil before we finally see this product of the flower, right? And so like kind of keeping that idea in mind that a lot of the creativity that we are doing is that time when we're under the soil where nobody's going to see that.
Mhm.
And I think just having a lot of self-compassion for the fact that, part of the creative process is me sitting around daydreaming. Part of the creative process is me doing my dishes and getting lost in my head while I'm doing it. Like that is just as much of the creative process as actually sitting down and putting words to paper or paint on paper or anything like that. And, honestly, I was a fairly able-bodied person up until about 8 years ago. I would say eight-ish, yeah, nine, something like that. And when I became disabled, like a lot of this shifted for me. Like I have becoming disabled to thank for a lot of this. Like being able to be compassionate with myself and being able to slow down and give myself that time and all of those things that I think were harder before when I was really in this like gotta produce, gotta do, gotta go, go, go mindset. That now is just kind of like, I have to lay in bed today, so I'm gonna lay in bed and look at Pinterest of ideas of things I want to create. And that's part of the creative process as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really beautiful like framing of the way that we imagine we're supposed to be, right? Like what we're supposed to be doing because we're able to do it.
Mhm.
Um, how long did it take you to like relax into that though? That's a huge, huge
Oh
shift.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say it's still a process. It's one of those processes that is continuous because we are so immersed in this society and this culture of productivity and, you know, like all of that, that it's something that I have to constantly kind of remind myself of. I will find myself like shifting into that kind of go, go, go mode. But, you know, I would say probably a couple of years at the beginning to really shift into like, okay, it is okay to rest. It is okay to have this quiet time. It is like this, there's nothing wrong with this, you know, and in fact, it's kind of an act of resistance and an act of liberation, even to be like, I'm going to take care of myself today and I'm going to rest. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you're going to tell people like, hey, I can't, I will not today.
Mhm.
I cannot.
Yep.
Um, or the really, really hard thing is like, I need your help.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, what what are you working on right now?
Oh
What
gosh.
what's in the
Uh,
work? I see you're performing
yeah.
virtually.
Some
And
virtually and some back in person, slowly getting back into person. So yeah, that is exciting, to be able to be performing. Really, performance didn't stop like through the pandemic. Like I was so excited to see all of these like virtual performances, and like as a disabled person, I'm like really hoping that they continue because it's so much more accessible to so many people.
yeah.
But yeah, so I'm still doing some performing. I am taking this amazing micro memoir class right now. So that has been like kind of the thing that I've gotten into as far as writing lately, is writing these little tiny snapshots of memory, which is fun and kind of juicy and delicious.
And kind of puzzly, right? When it's micro, you sort of have to like really
Yeah,
make
like
it part of your brain.
yeah, I love doing any sort of writing that has constraints on it, you know? So like poetry, if you give me a form that has lots of rules, I love that because it's like the more rules you put on it, the harder your brain like pushes to like figure out ways to make it happen.
And
So
to find something new and unexpected.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 So yeah, just kind of piddling away at all the different art things and yeah.
And are you is your artwork for sale?
I have sold like little things, like I make jewelry and stuff, but like my visual art that I do, like most of it I just kind of do for myself, or for family and friends. It's such a um introspective process for me. A lot of it is very deeply personal, that yeah, it's almost a similar to a process of like journaling, for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a value too, like when we're talking about this idea of productivity and trying to figure out how to now market and brand and blah blah blah,
Mhm.
something that it sort of takes the like play out of it,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
sometimes, and it's nice to have some parts of our lives fenced off that way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, we're super looking forward to your workshop. It's a visual journaling workshop,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And
Like,
so it will be a mixed media, and kind of definitely looking at that idea of kind of identity through visual arts. And so we'll do a couple of like um, skills. So we'll learn some about image transfers, and we'll do create some collage papers and kind of for skills. But then it's really just an intuitive process of like what feels good on this page for me, and what colors do I want to play with, and how do I want to piece this together. So yeah.
love it so much. Thank you so much for doing this for us. We're really excited to have you and for chatting.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.